William didn't know that Harry and Meghan had already recorded their poison.
For years, Thomas Markle watched his daughter's royal transformation from a painful distance, surrounded by unanswered calls, public accusations, and humiliating headlines. But behind his silence, he had preserved memories, conversations, and warnings that could shatter the carefully controlled story Meghan and Harry had presented to the world. When Meghan's engagement to Prince Harry was announced, Thomas allegedly felt emotions he could barely separate. There was pride, certainly. His daughter had crossed into a world few people could ever imagine entering. But beneath that pride was fear. This was not merely a marriage. Meghan was stepping into the most watched family on earth, where affection could become duty, private mistakes could become international scandals, and every relative could be judged as either useful or dangerous. At first, Thomas believed he would still have a place in her life. Yet as the wedding drew closer, the conversations reportedly became shorter, colder, and more carefully controlled. Calls were delayed. Messages went unanswered. Palace advisors, publicists, and Harry seemed to form a protective circle around Meghan, and Thomas began to feel that every word he spoke was being examined for risk. The public saw a polished transformation, an actress becoming a duchess, a modern love story unfolding before the world. Thomas remembered something more complicated. He remembered Meghan's ambition, the disappointments she had endured, the family arguments that never reached the newspapers, and private promises that now seemed to have vanished beneath royal protocol. He also kept things: old messages, handwritten notes, family photographs, fragments of conversations he had replayed for years. Thomas allegedly never planned to reveal them. They were not evidence to him at first. They were pieces of a relationship he still hoped might be repaired. But as silence hardened into estrangement, those memories began to feel like the only protection he had against being permanently cast as the villain. That created an agonizing choice. Speaking could destroy the last possibility of reconciliation. Remaining silent would allow others to define the collapse without challenge. Harry, meanwhile, remained an unseen but powerful presence. Thomas reportedly sensed that even private exchanges with Meghan were now shaped by Harry's fears, royal pressure, and the belief that her family could threaten their future. Every question sounded like criticism. Every hesitation felt like betrayal. But Thomas's most dangerous claim was never about one failed phone call or one bitter argument. It concerned what Meghan and Harry may have been discussing before the public understood how deeply unhappy they had become, and how early they may have imagined a life beyond palace control. Age, illness, and years of separation had changed Thomas's calculation. Time no longer felt unlimited. If he wanted his version of the past to survive, he believed he had to speak before silence buried it forever. Yet before Thomas could reveal what Meghan and Harry had allegedly planned, he had to explain how a father-daughter relationship, once built on loyalty, became a battlefield of silence, suspicion, and carefully managed public blame. Long before royal titles, palace corridors, and global interviews, Thomas claims Meghan had already learned how to survive by controlling the story around her. According to him, the woman who entered the monarchy was not suddenly changed by royal pressure. She was carrying old wounds, powerful ambitions, and a carefully protected private side. Thomas remembered a daughter who wanted more than comfort. Meghan wanted certainty. From an early age, she seemed determined to escape every form of insecurity that could leave her dependent on someone else's approval. She worked hard, argued her case, and built an identity around being impossible to ignore. Thomas admired that strength. He encouraged it. He believed he was helping her become fearless. But their bond, he later claimed, was never simple. There was affection, loyalty, and years of support. Yet Thomas gradually noticed that Meghan could become distant when family tension threatened the future she had imagined. She did not always explode. Sometimes she simply withdrew. calls became less frequent. Difficult conversations were delayed. Emotional doors closed quietly, and by the time anyone realized what had happened, the distance already felt permanent. To the outside world, Meghan could appear warm, confident, and deeply attentive. Thomas did not deny that side of her. But he claimed there was another Meghan who emerged whenever she felt criticized or misunderstood. That version was guarded. Questions became attacks. Concern could be interpreted as doubt. Once trust was damaged, access to her private world became harder to regain. Hollywood, Thomas believed, sharpened those instincts. It taught Meghan that talent was not enough. Presentation mattered. Relationships mattered. So did timing, reputation, and knowing exactly who could be trusted with personal information. She learned how quickly one careless detail could define a person, and how powerful it could be to shape the story before anyone else had the chance. That was why powerful institutions fascinated her. They offered reach, status, and protection. But they also demanded obedience. Thomas claimed Meghan wanted influence without surrendering control, and he suspected she understood that contradiction long before entering royal life. Then, Harry arrived. To Meghan, he represented love, security, and access to a world vast enough to match her ambitions. Yet he also came with history, hierarchy, and rules older than either of them. Thomas believed Meghan understood that joining Harry would require sacrifices, but she may not have accepted that those sacrifices would include her voice, her independence, and eventually parts of her family. In private conversations, Thomas allegedly heard less about becoming a conventional working royal and more about building something global, something modern, influential, and not fully contained by palace tradition. At the time, he did not see danger in those dreams. He saw a daughter seeking freedom and purpose. Only later did those memories begin to sound like warnings, because the wedding was not simply the ending of a love story. It was becoming the moment when certain relationships would be protected, others would be managed, and some would be quietly pushed beyond the gates. And as the wedding approached, the palace believed it was preparing for a celebration, while Thomas claims another struggle was already unfolding behind the scenes, one involving loyalty, embarrassment, and who would be allowed to remain close to Meghan. The world saw a royal wedding filled with ceremony, romance, and historic promise. Thomas Markle remembers something far colder: frantic calls, collapsing trust, public humiliation, and a final conversation that left him believing the wedding was not bringing two families together, it was quietly deciding which family would be left behind. The photo controversy changed everything because it erupted at the worst possible moment. Thomas was already struggling beneath the pressure of global attention, but once the images became public, embarrassment turned into condemnation. His credibility collapsed overnight. To the outside world, he was no longer simply Meghan's father. He had become another scandal attached to her name. Thomas allegedly felt trapped. Reporters surrounded him. Every action was questioned. His health was deteriorating, his judgment was under attack, and demands seemed to arrive faster than he could answer them. He believed he was being asked to behave perfectly inside a crisis no ordinary person could control. One mistake had become a public verdict. Then came the loss he could not undo. Thomas had imagined walking Meghan down the aisle for years. It was supposed to be a private promise fulfilled before the world. Instead, illness, shame, and broken communication removed him from the ceremony entirely. To him, it felt like more than missing a wedding. It felt like Meghan's old life was being cut away at the exact moment her royal identity became complete. The final telephone exchanges only deepened the wound. Harry was reportedly angry. Thomas felt judged and cornered. Meghan was caught between protecting her future and confronting a father who believed he had already been abandoned. Each person thought trust had been broken. Each believed the others had failed to understand the pressure they were under. After that, Thomas suspected the palace no longer saw him as a vulnerable parent. He had become a threat to the Sussex image, unpredictable, exposed, and impossible to manage quietly. When King Charles stepped forward to escort Meghan, the gesture carried dignity and compassion. But for Thomas, watching from a distance, it also carried a brutal message. Another father figure had taken the place he once believed belonged only to him. He later came to see Meghan's decision to continue without him as part of a darker pattern. Once a relationship became publicly damaging, emotional distance followed. Not because she felt nothing, Thomas believed, but because survival now required separation. Still, his anger remained mixed with grief. He blamed the press, palace pressure, Harry's protectiveness, his own mistakes, and Meghan's fear in equal measure. Yet what disturbed him most came after the ceremony, when he allegedly heard that Meghan and Harry were already discussing how to protect themselves from the institution they had just entered. That possibility transformed the wedding in his mind. It was no longer merely the beginning of royal life. It may have been the beginning of an exit strategy planned long before the public saw any sign of rebellion. The wedding had ended, the crowds had disappeared, and Thomas had been left outside the new royal circle, but according to him, the real secret was only beginning. Because Meghan and Harry were already preparing for a future the palace never expected. Thomas's central revelation changes the entire meaning of the Sussex story. He claims Meghan and Harry's eventual departure was not born from one explosive argument or one unbearable headline. Instead, he believes they had quietly discussed building an independent life, separate from palace control, far earlier than anyone was told. According to Thomas, Meghan had expressed doubts about living permanently inside royal protocol before the Sussex crisis became visible to the public. The concern was not simply about difficult headlines, it was about surrendering control to an institution built on hierarchy, obedience, and tradition. Royalty offered extraordinary influence, but it also demanded patience, restraint, and dependence on decisions made behind closed doors. Thomas believed Meghan and Harry wanted the power of the royal platform without being completely imprisoned by its rules. They valued the recognition, reach, and prestige that came with their position, yet feared the financial restrictions, rigid chain of command, and lack of ownership over their public voices. Certain early conversations began to sound different to Thomas after their departure. What had once seemed like ordinary dreams of freedom now appeared to suggest a divided future. Royal visibility on one side, private independence on the other. Meghan, he claims, imagined a global identity operating beyond Britain, one combining charity, celebrity influence, media access, and the authority of royal association. Harry's reasons, however, were allegedly more emotional. Thomas believed Meghan was driven by autonomy, while Harry was driven by fear. Harry had grown up inside the machinery of monarchy, carrying memories of press intrusion and the institutional silence he connected to his mother's suffering. Leaving was not merely rebellion to him. It was protection. He feared history repeating itself, this time with Meghan at the center. Their separate wounds may have fused into one powerful plan. Meghan wanted control over her future. Harry wanted to save his family from a system he no longer trusted. But Thomas claims Meghan knew senior royals would resist. The monarchy could not be treated as a flexible international brand without threatening its authority. If the couple revealed their ambitions too early, they risked losing palace trust, public sympathy, funding, security, and their position within the hierarchy. Secrecy, therefore, became part of survival. Thomas also recalls Meghan allegedly suggesting that true independence would eventually allow her to repair damaged family relationships on her own terms. Yet when freedom finally came, reconciliation did not. The silence only deepened. That led him to an even darker suspicion. Some relatives may not have been excluded simply because they caused embarrassment. Thomas believes they were kept away because they remembered too much, Meghan's earlier ambitions, private fears, and emotional vulnerabilities before the royal story began. Still, his claim remains impossible to separate from pain. He cannot reveal every message or conversation without exposing deeply private details. Critics can dismiss his memories as bitterness, wounded pride, or a father reshaping the past after rejection. But if Thomas's interpretation is correct, Megxit was never a sudden escape. It was the final stage of a hidden conflict that had been growing beneath the royal image from the beginning. But a secret plan alone could not explain the fury that followed. Because inside the palace, Meghan and Harry's desire for independence was about to collide with something far older and more powerful: the monarchy's unwritten demand for total loyalty. When palace officials finally understood the scale of Meghan and Harry's frustration, the crisis was no longer about difficult headlines or family disagreements. It had become a struggle over authority itself: who controlled the couple's future, who owned their royal identity, and whether love could survive a war against the crown. Inside palace circles, the fear was immediate. Senior courtiers allegedly believed the Sussexes were asking for a freedom the monarchy could not grant without weakening the rules that held the institution together. Royal life was not designed around personal choice. It demanded service, discipline, silence, and loyalty to a collective image. Meghan and Harry, however, wanted control over their causes, their communication, their income, and the way their story was told. That difference became impossible to hide. Queen Elizabeth II was said to understand the emotional danger, but she also understood the constitutional one. If Harry and Meghan were allowed to keep royal status while living independently, earning privately, and making decisions beyond palace control, others might demand the same arrangement. What looked like a family compromise could become a precedent capable of changing the monarchy forever. William's concern was more personal. He allegedly feared Harry was making permanent decisions while angry, isolated, and under immense pressure. But Harry did not hear concern. He heard resistance. To him, every warning sounded like another attempt to protect the institution at Meghan's expense. And Harry carried an old terror the palace could never fully separate from the present. He believed silence, delay, and public pressure had once failed his mother. The thought of losing Meghan to the same machinery made compromise feel dangerous. Waiting was not patience. In his mind, it was surrender. Meghan's pain was different, but equally intense. She had entered royal life believing the platform would expand her voice. Instead, she felt watched, restricted, and increasingly unable to answer the attacks surrounding her. Success had placed her at the center of global attention, yet privately she believed she had less power than before. Thomas's exclusion now seemed part of a much wider pattern. Every outsider was viewed as a possible leak. Every relative, aide, journalist, or advisor could turn a private conversation into a weapon. Trust collapsed between households, and once anonymous briefings began to appear, each side suspected the other. The palace tried to slow the crisis. Meghan and Harry believed that delay was meant to exhaust them into obedience. Then, the argument turned brutal. Could they live abroad, retain their royal identity, keep security, protect their titles, and still build an independent future? Money, branding, status, and protection stopped being practical questions. They became emotional weapons. Thomas believed Harry was now trapped between two selves, the prince raised to serve the crown, and the husband determined to defend his family from it. One identity demanded patience. The other demanded escape. Soon, the private conflict could no longer be contained. Meghan and Harry prepared to seize control of the announcement before the palace could define their departure for them. The palace still believed time might produce a compromise, but Meghan and Harry had reached a darker conclusion. If the institution controlled the timing, it would also control the truth, and they were no longer willing to wait. Harry believed leaving would protect his wife, preserve his marriage, and break the cycle that had haunted him since childhood. Yet Thomas claims the decision created a new prison, one built from public expectation. Financial pressure, family estrangement, and the impossible demand to justify everything they had sacrificed. For Harry, the choice was deeply personal. He was no longer deciding only where he belonged within the monarchy. He was deciding what kind of husband and father he wanted to be. Meghan and their children came first, even if protecting them meant rejecting the role he had been prepared to perform since birth. That rejection carried a brutal cost. His relationship with King Charles became strained. The bond with William hardened into distance. Long-standing ties to royal staff, military associations, charities, and friends were disrupted or lost. The prince, who had once seemed inseparable from duty, was now stepping away from the identity that had shaped almost every year of his life. Meghan initially viewed the move as liberation. Outside palace control, she could speak in her own voice, choose her own projects, raise her children with greater privacy, and make decisions without waiting for approval from courtiers. For the first time, the future appeared to belong to them. But freedom came with demands they had not fully escaped. Their new life required money, security, staff, protection, and constant public relevance. The media did not disappear. It followed them. Every interview was examined. Every deal was questioned. Every silence became suspicious. When Meghan and Harry shared their experiences publicly, supporters saw courage and survival. Inside royal circles, however, the reaction was colder. Personal revelations were seen not as healing, but as betrayal. Each disclosure seemed to widen the divide and make reconciliation more dangerous. Thomas watched this unfold with growing resentment. Meghan spoke about pain, abandonment, and the damage caused by family conflict, yet he felt his own suffering had been reduced to an inconvenience. In his eyes, compassion flowed in only one direction. He also believed Harry was becoming increasingly isolated from people who might challenge their decisions. Those who questioned the couple could be viewed as hostile, disloyal, or connected to the same system they had escaped. That made their bond stronger, but it also narrowed the circle around them. The contradiction became impossible to ignore. Meghan and Harry wanted distance from royalty, yet much of their global importance still came from the family they had left. Every commercial project and public statement increased palace suspicion that royal pain was becoming part of an independent identity. Meghan eventually faced the truth she had hoped to avoid. Freedom did not end scrutiny. It only changed who controlled the crisis. And according to Thomas, one unresolved fear remained beneath everything. Meghan was not only avoiding him because of anger. She may have feared what would happen if they finally spoke, and whether their competing versions of the past could survive the same conversation. Freedom had carried them across an ocean, but it could not erase the unfinished relationships left behind, and Thomas now claims Meghan's silence was driven not only by anger, but by a fear that reconciliation would expose contradictions neither side could survive. The world repeatedly asked why Meghan would not simply call her father, meet him privately, and end years of public hostility. Thomas claims the answer is more complicated than cruelty or pride. He believes a reunion would force them to confront memories that challenge both of their carefully defended versions of the past. To Thomas, reconciliation is no longer a private act. The moment contact became known, it could ignite another global spectacle. Every gesture would be studied. Every pause would invite speculation. Supporters would demand forgiveness, critics would search for hypocrisy, and any disagreement could become another weapon in a conflict already shaped by headlines. Meghan may fear something even more personal. A private conversation could become public. An apology could be repeated differently. A moment of weakness might be turned into an interview, and words spoken in trust could appear before millions. From her perspective, the risk is not only emotional manipulation. It is losing control of the story again. Thomas insists that direct contact is all he wants. Yet every time he speaks publicly, he strengthens the argument against him. His interviews may come from desperation, but they also confirm Meghan's belief that communication cannot remain protected. That is the cruel trap at the center of their estrangement. Thomas speaks because Meghan will not answer. Meghan refuses to answer because Thomas speaks. Each reaction proves the other side's fear, and the silence grows heavier. But Thomas believes another question sits beneath the official explanations. Were relatives removed only because they betrayed Meghan, or because their presence complicated the identity she was creating? They remembered the years before royalty, the struggles, promises, contradictions, and support that did not fit neatly into the story of a woman standing alone against powerful forces. Harry's resistance allegedly made the wall even stronger. He believed Thomas had exposed Meghan to humiliation when she was most vulnerable. Protecting her, therefore, meant keeping danger outside. Yet that devotion may have required Harry to accept her version of every family conflict without attempting repair for himself. Thomas wonders whether Harry ever heard the complete story. Did he know about Meghan's childhood, her early disappointments, or the help Thomas says he gave before fame? Or did he enter a battle after hearing only the wounds that remained? The deepest pain now reaches another generation. Thomas has grandchildren he has never met. What began as a broken relationship between father and daughter has become a family fracture inherited by children too young to understand its cause. Meghan may believe distance protects them from scandal. Thomas asks whether permanent silence truly offers protection, or whether it teaches them that once trust breaks, family must disappear forever. A reunion could bring healing. It could also unleash accusations, leaks, and a media storm more destructive than the original separation. That uncertainty is precisely why neither side moves first. Thomas had revealed the alleged plan, the hidden fears, and the private resentments, but one final question remained. Had he exposed the truth? Or had years of rejection transformed a grieving father into the monarchy's most dangerous storyteller? Thomas Markle's revelations leave behind no simple heroes and no single villain. They reveal a family divided by ambition, protection, secrecy, and pain. But the most unsettling possibility is that every person involved may believe their own version completely, and that the truth disappeared long before anyone tried to recover it. Thomas knew Meghan before the titles, the palace rules, and the worldwide attention. That gives his words emotional weight. Yet years of rejection have also filled those memories with bitterness. Every recollection now carries two possible meanings: the insight of a father who knew his daughter closely, or the judgment of a man wounded by being shut out. That uncertainty surrounds his central claim. Did Meghan and Harry's early discussions about independence prove that they had always planned to escape royal control? Or were they simply considering options while pressure, hostility, and fear grew around them? What Thomas remembers as calculation may have felt like survival to Meghan. What he sees as ambition may have been desperation. Memory is rarely untouched by pain. A conversation recalled after years of silence can change shape. One person remembers a promise. Another remembers only a possibility. One hears rejection. The other remembers setting a boundary. Meghan's silence protects her from another public battle, but it also leaves an empty space Thomas can fill. By refusing to respond, she denies him access to her private life. At the same time, she allows his account to stand without direct challenge. Harry remains caught at the center. He sacrificed trust within the monarchy to defend his wife, yet even that sacrifice could not end the conflict surrounding her family. The harder he tried to build a wall around Meghan, the more every voice outside that wall demanded to be heard. The monarchy also played its part. Its culture of briefings, protocol, delayed responses, and institutional protection left little room for honest confrontation. This was not a new pattern. Royal history had seen marriages damaged by duty, relatives pushed aside for threatening the official image, and private suffering hidden behind public ceremony. Thomas still believes Meghan and Harry wanted an independent future earlier than they admitted. But the meaning of that desire remains unresolved. It could suggest careful planning. It could reveal two people searching for an escape before they knew whether escape was possible. The consequences, however, are undeniable. A father lost his daughter. Grandchildren remained separated from relatives. Brothers became strangers. Royal trust weakened. Private memories turned into possible evidence. Thomas did not end this journey in victory. Speaking restored his voice, but it may also have sealed the distance forever. And Meghan's silence raises one final, painful question. Did she escape a destructive family cycle? Or repeat it by building another wall no one can cross? Perhaps the strongest proof still exists in private messages neither side dares release, because revealing them could destroy the last fragile pieces of what once connected them. And until those private messages are revealed, or a father and daughter finally speak without cameras, courtiers, or intermediaries, the world will continue debating a royal secret, whose deepest truth may belong only to the people who can no longer trust one another.